Shabbat Shalom, everybody. This is Rav Shmuel with you today with this week's 10-minute Torah. And what is this week's 10-minute Torah? Forgive me, I'm getting my timer ready because we're going to make this. I say it's a 10-minute Torah. Let's make it a 10-minute Torah. And this week's 10-minute Torah is all about Pesach, all Pesach, all the time. So the first day of Pesach, Passover, is Sunday. So our first Seder, of course, is Saturday night. And the second Passover was going to be Sunday. I'm sorry. The first Passover service is Sunday. Second one is Monday. And the seventh also coincides with Shabbat, so it's next Saturday. And the final day of Passover is the 8th. So typically in the conservative movement, we don't do all the Passover services, and there are Passover services every single day of the 8 days out here in the diaspora. In fact, what I may do is something I don't typically do, which is share my screen and show you what some of the Torah readings are as we go through it and talk about the themes that are involved in the various Passover readings. As you imagine, it's kind of a no-brainer. What are the readings? They have to do with Passover. And yet there's a couple that don't, and you'll see what I mean. So before we get into that, let me do a little bit of preaching. Passover celebrates freedom. It is our freedom from bondage, and it is the freedom to be able to express ourselves as Jews and live and express our heritage, our legacy, our covenant, and our religion. And it's very important that we appreciate that. So here's what I'm leading up to. After World War II, Judaism in this country, in the United States, was booming. It was a booming industry. The synagogues were started. The conservative movement really took off after World War II. For those 20, 30 years right after that, conservative Judaism was about 70, 75% of Jews. Why? Because it represented kind of, let's call it a Goldilocks movement, kind of a middle ground. Not as strict and as rigid as Orthodox, and certainly not as liberal as Reform, which some people said had gone so far liberal and progressive that it doesn't even look like Judaism anymore. It's more, I mean, at one point, I believe Reform Judaism was having services on a Sunday. Orthodox, very strict, and some people won kind of a middle ground where they had a little bit, and this is kind of my interpretation, a little bit of appreciation of the spirituality. In other words, you're not so tied down into the actual rites that we do, or the dogma, where you don't have time for the actual spirituality and what it means. The other thing is that, as people moved out into suburbia, lives got busy, right? So there it is. And these days, conservative Judaism is down, but then again, so are some of the others, some of the other movements, the Reformed and the Orthodox. Why is that? Maybe it's because back then there was more of a concern that, gosh, we almost lost our whole population. We need to get going and get Judaism back on a solid footing. And now that we've kind of had it easy, and this is unfortunately the story of Judaism, people just, whatever. So think of this as a call, to get involved. If there's a synagogue near you, check it out. If not, and I've gotten this feedback from people. There are people that, look at my sermons, at my Devar Torah, and they appreciate it because they're not near a synagogue. And thank you for listening. And, of course, do what you got to do what you can do. But let's start making a commitment to get involved. If there are things that you don't like, if maybe, the service just kind of drones on, let's get some feedback. I personally am always open to feedback. The reason I do a service the way I do it now is because people have told me, this is what we like. And you know what? Quality over quantity. Okay, enough preaching. Let's talk about Passover. So the first reading about Passover is, as you would guess, and you know what I think I'm going to do? I think I'm actually going to share my screen. Okay, so that is Passover. That is the schedule of the various Passover services, the Torah services. And you can see this quite a bit. You can see that on Shabbat, there are 7 aliyot, as you would imagine. When it's not Shabbat and it's just the big part of the holiday, we have 5 aliyot. See, here's Passover 8. The first day, which is also not on Shabbat, 5 aliyot. Second day, very important, 5 aliyot. Why 5 and not 7? Well, the rabbis, when they created the Judaism that we practice today, because there was no temple, they thought, okay, on Shabbat, there's going to be 7 aliyot. 7 is the number of completion. When we do a service during the week, as we do here, typically there's 3, but because this is Passover, and we're doing a Chol Moed. Chol means secular, or it's another word for weekday. Moed means seed or time, and it's the intermediate days of the holiday. It's not the big days, the first 2 and the last 2. It's just kind of the intermediate days, kind of like a half holiday. So there's typically your 3 aliyot, and then the 4th is added for Passover and Sukkot and for the new moon, which is kind of, you see it's from a different book, Numbers. And this particular reading, as you'll see, is consistent with all the readings from Numbers, is the actual offering that they did. It's the sheep, it's the bull, it's, the mincha, the unleavened bread that accompanied it. That's kind of a typical reading. And it's basically, giving you homage to the original temple. So again, during the week, we would have, if it was just a plain ordinary Saturday afternoon, Monday or Thursday, 3 aliyot. If it was a new moon or an intermediate day, there's 4. As you can see here, if it's one of the pilgrimage festivals, which this is, Passover, Shavuot, Sukkot, so named because the people in Israel, the Israelites, would travel to the temple at pilgrimage, right? Then it's 5. Yom Kippur is 6, Shabbat is 7 or more. You can add aliyot, people being called up to the Torah. You can have everybody come up if you want to spend the day doing that. It's up to you, right? Okay, so as you can see, these are the themes of Passover. And the first reading for the first day, as you would see, is preparing Pesach and leaving Egypt. So it's Exodus. It's when Moses calls all the elders together and says, tell everybody that we're going to have a feast. You're going to take a lamb. You're going to slaughter it. You're going to eat all of it. Don't leave anything over. If you have not enough people to eat it, invite another family. If it's too much, get another one. With the blood, of course, put it on the lintels so that the destroyer knows that you're committed. Okay, God knows who's Jewish and who isn't, right? But it's kind of an acknowledgement. Yes, I'm Jewish, and yes, I'm invested in this. So pass over the house, hence the word Passover. Okay. Second reading is the actual offering. It was the actual, what do we do when we're observing Passover and we have a temple, or in this case, a tabernacle? We're going to slaughter, we're going to offer the animals, we're going to have a barbecue. That's what it is. You talk about slaughtering animals and, people get really kind of upset, about cruelty to animals. But I will say shechita, which is the process of preparing an animal for an offering, it's absolutely painless, and it's done that way for the absolute reason. Okay. Let's skip down to the last 2 days. Now, this year, or the 7th day occurs on Shabbat, and it's the Song of the Sea. Okay. It's when the people left. Here comes Pharaoh and his special forces to execute the people. He had second thoughts. Moses raises his staff, the sea parts, everybody goes, the ground hardens, people go through. Once they're through, the cloud, the pillars that were holding the Egyptians back disappear. They stupidly follow through and they're drowned, right? Okay. Before that, we do Song of Songs written by King Solomon. Why? Because a lot of people feel it's the story of Israel after the Exodus, and it represents kind of a love affair. And it is. It's written as a love affair between God and Israel. So we read that prior. We'll probably just read part of it. And the 8th day is forgiving loans, because if somebody is destitute and they need money to get their business or their livelihood back going, you just offer them money. It's charity. It's tzedakah. The Hebrew word for charity is tzedakah, which comes from the word tzedek, which means justice. So you're doing justice. You're doing God's work by giving them money. Say, here you go. Get started. And if they can pay you back, great. If not, if they can't pay you back within, by the Shemitah year, the 7th year, the loan's forgiven. And that's your contribution to their livelihood. Okay, then we have also the Pesach offering and about eating unleavened bread. And then finally, it's, the 3 pilgrimage festivals. During the week, the intermediate days, and yes, there is a service, and yes, there is a Torah reading. On the first day of the intermediate day, day 1, Chol Moed, we have the idea of sanctifying the firstborn. And by the way, this reading are 2 of the parchments that are in the tefillin that we read. And it talks about sanctifying the firstborn because, after all, that's another Passover theme. God saved the firstborn of Israel because Pharaoh wanted to do away with us and he wanted to kill the firstborn. Nobody could have kids, and there it is. So you sanctify the firstborn. We also hear again, no interest loans, not cursing Hashem or our leaders, no tail bearing. Very, very important in Judaism. Judaism does not believe in free speech, in my opinion, because it says, watch what you say. Third day, second set of 10 commandments, the 13 attributes of Hashem, Adonai, El Rachum, V'chanun, that, settling the promised land, the idea, once again, Passover, sanctifying the firstborn, and finally, the 4th day, Pesach Sheni, there was a second Passover. Some people had to do last rites. Somebody died, they got to take care of the body. Now they're impure, they can't do Passover. So God's like, I'll tell you what, we'll just do another Passover 30 days later so you can do it. Okay, I've gone over my time. Little dry, but I hope it was educational. I hope that you have a great Passover. And for those of you that are just looking on that are not Jewish, I hope you have a good holiday of yourself, Easter, whatever it is you observe. And as always, thank you for listening.